I risked my life to protect a stranger, but why do I feel more alive more than ever? The greatest, most devastating truth I ever learned was that you have to almost die to realize you were never truly living. I'm Elias, 36, and until 8 months ago, I was a ghost walking through a meticulously arranged life, a man suffocated by comfort. Then, in a single, chaotic moment, I risked everything for a stranger, and in doing so, I finally came alive. For 10 years, my life was a perfect, beige script. I was a senior database architect, highly paid, highly regarded, and utterly bored. My apartment was minimalist, my diet was routine, and my future was predictable down to the retirement date. I didn't have passion, I had efficiency. I didn't have risk, I had mutual funds. I was surrounded by every convenience, yet I suffered from a profound, quiet numbness, a creeping, existential dread that whispered, "Is this all there is?" I wasn't unhappy, which was perhaps the most frightening thing of all. I was simply unfeeling. I could navigate meetings, pay bills, and maintain relationships, but the world was muted, like a film played in slow motion with the volume turned down. I missed the sharp edges of life, the feeling of real consequence, the rush of a genuine unknown. My most adventurous moment each week was deciding whether to order Thai or Italian delivery. I was 36, successful, and felt like I was already attending my own very boring funeral. Then there was the incident, the flash of chaotic, uncontrolled life that tore through my carefully constructed walls of glass and steel. It happened on a Monday, the cruelest day for a routine to break. I was taking my usual lunchtime stroll through the financial district, precisely between noon and 12:30. I remember the smell of stale coffee and the sound of 1,000 expensive shoes clicking on the marble. That's when I saw her. She was sitting alone at a polished iron table outside a quiet cafe, focused intently on a small, worn leather journal. Her name, I would later learn, was Anya, and she was 28. She wasn't glamorous or overtly striking, she was just intensely real. Her coat was slightly too big, her hands were ink-stained, and she possessed an air of deep concentration that made the rest of the hurried world around her fade. She was writing something that clearly mattered. I walked past her table and then something in my peripheral vision snagged my attention, a tiny, almost imperceptible misalignment in the routine. Two men, both wearing expensive, anonymous gray suits, were walking toward her from opposite directions. They weren't looking at her, they were looking past her, scanning the crowd. Their posture was too rigid, their pace too synchronized. They moved with a predatory, cold efficiency that only people trained to be invisible truly possess. These weren't muggers, they were professionals. The threat wasn't about a wallet, it was about the contents of that little leather journal. My heart, which usually thumped with the reliability of a well-oiled machine, hammered once, hard, against my ribs. In my life, a threat was usually a failed quarterly earnings report. This was visceral, immediate, and utterly terrifying. I kept walking, rounding the corner, my mind racing. I could ignore it, it was none of my business. It was almost certainly a corporate dispute, something far beyond my jurisdiction. To intervene would be to step out of my safe, predictable life and directly into the path of something dangerous, something that could ruin the perfect, beige script I had spent a decade writing. And that was precisely why I stopped. The thought wasn't moral, it was purely physical. It was a raw, primal impulse to feel something real again, to puncture the crushing boredom of safety. I turned around. The men were closing in on Anya's table. One reached into his suit jacket, not for a gun, but for something that looked like a pressurized spray. It was designed for silent, immediate incapacitation. They weren't planning to question her, they were planning to erase her. My training as a database architect offered no guidance. My savings offered no protection. In that split second, the decision wasn't about heroism, it was about choosing life over stasis. I dropped my briefcase, not caring that my expensive tablet shattered on the pavement. I started sprinting toward her table, a man who hadn't genuinely exerted himself in years. The sudden, burning ache in my lungs was the first honest feeling I'd had in a decade. I reached her table and, without pausing, slammed my hands onto the small, fragile iron surface. The whole structure, table, chair, and Anya's coffee cup, flipped over with a deafening crash. The sound was colossal, tearing through the quiet composure of the financial district. Anya screamed, confused and splattered with lukewarm coffee. The two gray men, thrown off their timing by the sudden, massive disruption, paused for just a fraction of a second. That was all I needed. I grabbed Anya's arm, my fingers finding the slender, cold bone beneath her coat. The leather journal clattered to the ground, but I didn't dare stop. I pulled her to her feet and shoved her toward the narrow, winding service alley behind the cafe. The first gray man was fast. I felt a searing, sharp impact on my shoulder as he tackled me. We hit the brick wall, the air exploding from my lungs. The pain was immediate, dizzying, and utterly exhilarating. It was real. My suit jacket tore, and I felt the warm, sticky flow of blood down my arm. In a moment where you had to choose between fighting for your life and your safe routine, or running for your life and embracing the chaos, what would you choose? I used the only weapon I had. Brute, messy panic. I kicked out wildly, catching the man's leg, and shoved him back with a grunt, managing to get enough distance to scramble after Anya into the alleyway. The alley was chaos. I didn't run like a marathon runner. I ran like an animal, desperate, clumsy, and terrifyingly fast. I held Anya's hand, pulling her through bins and past delivery trucks. She was terrified but responsive, running purely on instinct. The pursuit was hot, immediate, and relentless. The gray men were behind us, gaining. I made a spontaneous decision, driven purely by adrenaline. I spotted a maintenance ladder leading to the roof of a low, abandoned dry cleaner. I shoved Anya toward it. Up, don't look back. She hesitated for a split second, her eyes huge and questioning. I pushed her hard against the ladder, buying her the necessary moment. I turned back to face the alley. The two men rounded the corner. I had nothing, no weapon, no training. But I had the blinding rush of purpose. I didn't want to fight, I wanted to buy time. I grabbed a rusted, empty oil drum and, using the last of my failing strength, rolled it directly into the path of the nearest man. The noise was deafening, the collision sickeningly solid. The drum didn't stop them, but it forced them to vault over the obstacle, losing crucial seconds. By the time they were clear, I was scrambling up the ladder, ignoring the tearing pain in my shoulder and the burning in my quads. We vaulted onto the sticky, tar-covered roof. I looked down at the street below, catching my breath. They were still searching, but we had gained a slight advantage, the element of surprise. We traversed 3 rooftops, running awkwardly over vents and cables, until we reached the edge of the district, jumping down onto a busy side street where we could disappear into the river of everyday pedestrians. I didn't stop running until we were 3 blocks away, completely absorbed in the crowd, breathing hard in a cheap, bustling coffee shop filled with oblivious tourists. We collapsed into a dark corner booth. Anya was shaking, tears silently running down her face, but she was clutching the little leather journal to her chest. My shoulder was throbbing, my suit was ruined, and I had bruises blooming everywhere. But my senses were alight. The coffee shop wasn't muted anymore, the sounds were crisp, the smell of burnt sugar and cheap espresso was overwhelming. My body felt every ounce of the trauma, but my mind was utterly, incandescently clear. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't thinking about a database query, I was thinking about the shape of the brick wall, the weight of the oil drum, the precise moment I turned left instead of right. I was aware of my own existence, sharply and unequivocally. I hadn't saved the world, I had saved a stranger. I didn't know why she was being hunted, or what was in the journal. I had risked my life, my health, and my meticulously constructed financial security on an impulse. My entire life was designed to prevent risk, yet embracing it had brought me an unbearable, shocking feeling of aliveness. Anya looked at me, her eyes red, and saw the blood on my shoulder. She asked me why. I had no eloquent answer, no noble speech about justice. I simply said I couldn't let it happen. She didn't press, just thanked me, her voice hoarse, and then, with a professional, urgent finality, she left. She disappeared, journal in hand, back into the unpredictable chaos that was her true world. I sat there alone, the adrenaline slowly receding, replaced by a profound, agonizing ache. But even that pain was a gift. It was proof of my body, proof of my action. I went home not to my sleek, minimalist apartment, but to a cheap motel room on the edge of the city. I spent the next week getting my shoulder stitched, filing a vague police report that went nowhere, and managing the fallout from my shattered phone and ruined briefcase. My old life tried to reassert itself, the calls from my boss, the demands of the routine, but I couldn't go back. The beige had been permanently stained with red. The mundane horror of my old life was no longer tolerable. The silence of my perfectly organized apartment felt like a tomb. I had tasted life at its sharpest edge, and I couldn't return to the soft, rounded corners of safety. I resigned from my job, citing sudden, severe stress. The lie was almost true. I sold the apartment, liquidated the remaining assets, and decided that instead of managing data for profit, I would manage my own life for meaning. I still don't know who Anya was, or what was in that journal. I never found out if the gray men ever came looking for me. But it doesn't matter. The sacrifice wasn't for the outcome, it was for the act. I risked my life to protect a stranger, and the consequence wasn't ruin or fear, but an intoxicating, vibrant clarity. My life is messy now, unpredictable, and financially complicated. But it's loud, it's real. I started volunteering for a low-profile organization that provides security for vulnerable activists, using my quiet, analytical mind to protect people who live on the edge. I have less money, more bruises, and absolutely no regret. I finally feel like my existence matters, not because of a paycheck, but because I am actively choosing to stand in the path of the storm. I risked my life to protect a stranger, but why do I feel more alive than ever? Because the risk itself was the antidote to the poison of my comfortable stasis. It was the moment I stopped being a spectator in my own existence and became a player in the world. If you were trapped in a life of comfortable routine and were suddenly offered a terrifying chance to break free, even if it meant risking everything, would you take it? Or would you return to the safety you know? If this raw emotional story of breaking free through sacrifice resonated with you, please hit the like button, share this profound narrative, and subscribe to follow my journey as I finally start living.